Hello everyone, today I bring you a video about James and Diep. In this episode, James and Diep give John a surprising and deeply meaningful gift. The story begins on a very ordinary morning, yet one filled with quiet emotions that only those involved can fully feel. That winter morning, the cold air covered the market, which had not yet fully awakened after a long night. Early mist still clung to the tarps above the stalls, shimmering faintly in the pale light of dawn. The ground was slightly damp, and the atmosphere was quieter than usual, with only a few early risers passing by, each hurrying through the biting cold. In the middle of that scene, Diep sat at her familiar stall, her posture slightly hunched, shoulders subtly drawn in against the chill. In front of her lay a small notebook, its cover worn, the corners frayed by time. It was not new, nor beautiful, but it was the thing Diep cherished most. She opened it, revealing thin pages filled with dense handwritten lines. Diep held her pen firmly, the tip resting on the paper for a long moment before moving. The numbers were written without haste, each stroke careful and neat. She lingered on every line longer than usual, as if making sure she had not missed even the smallest detail. Diep calculated everything with great care. She added, subtracted, then added again. Each expense was clearly noted: cost of goods, labor wages, small incidental costs during the day. At times, she frowned slightly, rereading the page from the beginning, then let out a soft breath when the numbers matched. In that breath was tension, but also a quiet sense of hope. This small notebook was not just bookkeeping, it was proof of her perseverance, of cold mornings when she had to wake before dawn, of moments of exhaustion when she still refused to give up. Diep did not notice that James had arrived. He had been standing by the stall for some time, silently watching her work. He did not speak right away, simply observing her familiar posture. The way Diep leaned over the notebook, so focused that she seemed to forget the world around her, made James pause longer than he intended. He watched her fingers holding the pen, watched each line appear on the page, and felt an emotion he could not quite name. Only when James shifted slightly closer, his shadow falling softly across the notebook, did Diep look up in surprise. Her eyes flickered with brief shock, then quickly softened when she realized it was James. He smiled, a smile not too obvious, yet warm enough. James asked about her work in a very natural way, asking how business was, whether the morning had gone smoothly. His voice was low and calm, careful not to disturb the quiet atmosphere around them. When James asked about profit and loss, Diep hesitated slightly. She looked back down at the notebook once more, as if gathering extra certainty for her answer. After a gentle breath, she said softly that after deducting all expenses, there was still some money left over. Her voice was not loud, nor did it carry any sense of boasting. It sounded more like a careful report of a result she had worked very hard to achieve. James leaned in, looking closely at the numbers in the notebook. His gaze lingered for a while, not out of doubt, but because emotion was clearly rising within him. There was surprise in his eyes, but even more so, quiet pride. He remembered the past, when Diep had struggled with every number, afraid of writing something wrong, afraid of miscalculating. There were days when her hands trembled as she held the notebook, asking again and again just to be sure. And now, everything was recorded neatly and clearly, showing a growth born from silent effort. James did not say much. He simply nodded slightly, his eyes moving from the notebook back to Diep. That silence was not heavy at all. Instead, it made Diep feel his recognition more clearly than any compliment could. She smiled faintly and lowered her head, warmth rising quietly in her chest, even though the morning cold had not eased. A cold gust of wind passed by. Diep lifted her hand to her collar and unconsciously brushed her lips. James noticed how dry and cracked they were, worn by the cold weather and long hours of outdoor work. He gently mentioned it, in a very casual tone, saying that her lips were badly chapped and that later he would give her a lip balm he kept in his car. Just a simple sentence, nothing elaborate, yet filled with genuine care. Diep paused for a moment when she heard that. She looked at James, then nodded softly. In the cold winter morning, among unfinished calculations in a small notebook, that simple concern made her feel much warmer. No grand words, no dramatic gestures, just an ordinary detail, yet enough to push away some of the cold surrounding them. Diep carefully closed the notebook and placed it to the side of the stall. James remained standing there, not in a hurry to leave. The morning continued to pass slowly, the mist had not fully lifted, and the surroundings remained as quiet as before, as if everything had only just begun. James asked Diep to help clean a car that had been left in the storage for a long time. A thin layer of dust covered it, making it obvious that it hadn't been touched for quite a while. Diep looked at the car for a moment, then nodded immediately, without any hesitation. She rolled up her sleeves a little higher, grabbed an old bucket, filled it with water, and dipped a worn cloth into it. The cold water touched her hands, making her shiver slightly, but Diep didn't stop. She began to wipe slowly, section by section, carefully, as if she were doing something truly important. The dust that had settled for days gradually disappeared with each gentle stroke of the cloth. Diep didn't rush. She bent down closer, switched hands, wrung out the cloth, and continued wiping, from the body of the car to the side mirrors, even the hidden corners that people often overlooked. James stood nearby, at first planning just to watch for a bit before helping, but soon he picked up another cloth and joined her. They didn't assign tasks to each other, whoever noticed a spot that wasn't clean simply took care of it naturally. While cleaning the car, they chatted casually. Nothing serious, just a few light jokes and ordinary questions. James shared some trivial stories, and Diep listened, smiling softly. At times, both of them paused because of some offhand remark, then continued working again. There was no modern car wash, no machines or fragrant soap foam, just a bucket of water, an old cloth, and the lingering cold of the morning. Yet the atmosphere between them was gentle and comfortable, making the task feel much simpler than it actually was. As the car gradually became cleaner, James looked it over and laughed, joking that it was even cleaner than if they had taken it to a professional car wash. Diep shook her head, saying it wasn't that clean and that professionals did a much better job. She said that modestly, but the corners of her lips still curved into a smile. Inside, Diep felt a quiet sense of happiness, not really because of the compliment, but because of the moment they were sharing, doing something very ordinary together, without pressure or worry. When they were done, James told Diep to rest and invited her out for coffee. The cafe was small and nearby, nothing fancy, just a few wooden tables and chairs and the familiar aroma of coffee. They sat facing each other, the warmth from their cups slowly spreading through the lingering cold. Diep lifted her cup, gently blew on it, then set it down. Her eyes drifted toward the window for a moment before she began to speak. Diep told James about the time when he wasn't around. She didn't speak quickly, nor did she try to make the story heavy. The memories simply surfaced little by little with each sentence. She talked about fear and worry, about nights when she lay alone feeling how fragile everything seemed. There were moments when she felt weak, unsure whether she could carry all the responsibilities on her own. During those times, she only thought of little me. Thinking of the child who still needed her, who needed someone to rely on, Diep kept telling herself that she wasn't allowed to collapse. She said she started learning from the smallest things. If she didn't know something, she asked. If she wasn't good at it, she practiced until she became familiar. At first, she was shy around customers, awkward in conversation, unsure of herself. There were times she came home and sat in silence for a long while, feeling like she hadn't accomplished anything meaningful. But the next day, she continued anyway. Gradually, Diep got used to communicating, to being seen by others, to making decisions on her own. From being afraid of making mistakes or being criticized, she trained herself to be calmer and more confident, so she could close each deal with her own ability. Diep told her story in a steady voice, without taking credit for herself or emphasizing the hardships. She simply described her journey, as if talking about a road she had already walked. Occasionally, she paused, took a sip of coffee, then continued. In her eyes, there was no longer the fear she once had, but the calmness of someone who had learned to face things and keep moving forward. James listened quietly, barely interrupting. He looked at Diep for a long time, deeply moved by what she shared. He realized that those difficult days had changed her far more than he had imagined. She was no longer someone who easily panicked or hesitated, but had become much stronger, more confident, and more mature. Every word Diep spoke reflected a growth shaped by experience, not by anyone else's teachings. Diep said she still had a lot to work on. She didn't think she was good enough yet, there were still many things to learn, many things to get used to. She wanted to be worthy of him, to be able to stand beside him without feeling insecure or anxious like before. The words were spoken softly, without pressure, just an honest thought from her heart. Hearing that, James felt his heart soften. Not because Diep made any grand promises, but because of the sincerity in every word she said. He looked at her, the woman sitting in front of him now, and felt clearly that between them, everything was slowly changing in a quiet but steady way, just like the journey Diep herself had gone through during that time. The afternoon passed slowly, the sunlight already much softer than it had been at noon. Diep brought little Nee along and carried their familiar basket of oranges to sit by the roadside. There was no fixed spot, just a small empty space, enough for the two of them to tuck themselves in and avoid the direct draft of cold wind. Diep spread a thin mat on the ground, placed the basket of oranges neatly in front, then pulled Nee close to her side. She adjusted the child's clothes, pulled the collar up higher, and reminded Nee to sit still and not run around, since the air was still cold. While waiting for customers, Diep peeled oranges for Nee. Each segment was carefully separated, all the seeds removed before she handed it to the child. Nee ate while chatting non-stop, telling little stories from school, asking random, disconnected questions. Diep listened and replied gently, occasionally wiping Nee's hands and reminding her to eat slowly so she wouldn't choke. These gestures repeated naturally, as if they had long since become habit. From time to time, passers-by stopped to buy oranges. Some bought many, others only a few. Diep was always friendly, handing over the oranges, taking the money, then carefully folding it and putting it away. Every bill was kept with care, not out of calculation, but because it was the result of patiently sitting and waiting, of effort and perseverance. Some familiar customers asked a few questions, wondering whether it was cold sitting outside like this. Diep simply smiled and replied briefly that she was used to it. The conversations were short, but enough to make the atmosphere feel less cold. Life for Diep and me was never abundant. Everything was just enough, sometimes even falling short. But on afternoons like this, sitting side by side, sharing sweet orange segments and exchanging small, simple stories, Diep felt her heart settle. Not because she had everything, but because she knew she was trying her best each day, and Nee was still there, healthy and well-behaved, by her side. When it grew fully dark, Diep packed up the basket of oranges and took me home. As soon as they arrived, she called James and invited him over for dinner. Her voice was calm, unhurried, just a very natural invitation. James said he was still busy with work and might come late. Diep wasn't upset, she simply reminded him to keep warm and not overwork himself. The call ended quickly, without complaints or reproach. After hanging up, Diep turned back to household tasks. She told me to take out her books and sit properly at the table to study. While me slowly sounded out each word, Diep cooked and listened at the same time, occasionally reminding her to read more slowly and clearly. The small kitchen gradually warmed with steam and the scent of rice cooking. A pot of water was set on the stove to heat for Nee's bath. Everything followed a familiar rhythm, unhurried, yet attentive. Nee's voice reciting the alphabet echoed steadily, sometimes hesitating, sometimes making mistakes, then being gently corrected by Diep. The house wasn't large, and there wasn't much furniture, but the warm yellow light and these everyday sounds made the space feel cozy. Diep worked while keeping an eye on her child, making sure everything stayed within her sight and control. Elsewhere, James visited John. Their meal was simple, with nothing elaborate. The two sat across from each other, eating and talking. The conversation revolved around work, land, livestock, farming, very practical plans. John spoke slowly now, no longer impulsive, each sentence carrying careful thought. James listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking for more details. Looking at John now, James clearly saw the change. Not in appearance, but in the way he thought, spoke, and faced life. John didn't avoid his past, but he also didn't dwell in it. He was trying, little by little, to start over from the smallest things. That realization eased James's heart. He believed that as long as a person was willing to try and keep moving forward, no matter how many mistakes they had made, life would always leave them a path to return. As night fully settled in, each person ended their day in their own quiet way. There were no major incidents, no dramatic events, just small tasks flowing one after another, Diep carefully counting the money from selling oranges, Nee finishing her homework and preparing for bed, James sharing a simple meal with John, ordinary conversations leaving behind private reflections in each of their hearts. A day passed like that, seemingly ordinary. Yet it was these very small things that were quietly building connection, creating a sense of fullness in a different way. Not loud, not showy, just effort, care, and quiet trust being nurtured day by day, in the simplest moments of life. That evening, when James returned from John's place, the weather had turned noticeably colder. The night wind swept along the familiar road, carrying a sharp chill that made him instinctively pull his collar higher. When he stopped the car in front of the house, he saw that the lights were still on inside. The small home stood quietly in the night, and the familiar sight made him slow down for a few seconds before stepping in. Diep was sitting beside little Nee. The child was sleepy, eyes half closed, lying obediently in her arms. Diep rocked her gently, each movement slow and steady, her voice soft and hushed, as if afraid to disturb the fragile sleep. Hearing the door open, Diep turned her head and saw James standing there. She asked if he was tired, her voice not loud but clear enough for him to hear. James shook his head and said he was fine, though there were still unspoken thoughts lingering in his eyes. After Nee had fallen completely asleep, Diep carefully laid her down on the bed, pulled the blanket up neatly, and then returned to the kitchen. The two of them sat together at the table. The small kitchen still held the warmth of dinner, the space quiet except for the steady ticking of the clock. James poured himself a glass of water, took a sip, and began telling Diep about his evening with John. He talked about the simple meal, nothing elaborate, just things John had grown and prepared himself. James described the newly improved garden, the soil not yet fully loosened but already neatly cleared. He spoke of the newly hatched chicks chirping in one corner of the yard, and of the pig John planned to raise and sell for the Lunar New Year. James remembered clearly the way John spoke that night, slowly, calmly, very different from before. There was no more impatience, no recklessness, every sentence carried thought and consideration for the future. James said what made him think the most was John's eyes. They no longer avoided the past, but neither were they trapped in it. John didn't complain or dwell on what had happened. He simply worked quietly, living decently day by day. Watching John like that, James could clearly feel that this was a man who truly wanted to start over, rebuilding his life from the smallest things. Diep listened for a long time without interrupting, quietly taking in every detail James shared. When he finished, she stayed silent for a moment, as if thinking deeply. Then she softly said that seeing John now reminded her of herself in the early days, starting with nothing, feeling both afraid and determined, worried yet forcing herself to stand firm. Diep said that some people don't need pity or grand words of comfort, they only need a genuine chance, a real opportunity to prove that they can live well. James nodded. He said what troubled him most was the fact that every time John took chickens or eggs to the market, he had to walk a long distance or rely on others to transport them. Small-scale work was already hard enough, depending on others only made income more unstable. James and Diep sat together for a long time, discussing it. They weren't calculating gains or losses, nor weighing personal benefit, they were thinking about how to help John stand on his own, not just for a short time, but for the long run. The atmosphere grew quiet and heavy with thought. Each of them had their own reflections, yet they were focused on the same thing. Finally, Diep spoke first. She said calmly and clearly that perhaps they should give John a small pickup truck. It didn't need to be new or large, just enough to carry chickens, eggs, and produce to the market. With his own vehicle, John would be more independent, less exhausted, and able to gradually expand his work and support himself. James looked at Diep, momentarily surprised. He didn't object, nor did he ask many questions. Then he smiled. James understood that this wasn't an impulsive decision, nor an act of temporary sympathy. It was empathy, born from Diep's own experience of starting over in hardship, from a heart that truly understood what that journey meant. A few days later, James and Diep went together to see John. When the small truck stopped in front of the yard, John didn't immediately understand what was happening. He looked at the vehicle, then at the two of them, his face full of confusion. When James explained that it was their gift to him, John stood frozen for a long moment. He waved his hands hurriedly, saying he couldn't accept it. He said he had already received too much help and couldn't take on such a great kindness. Diep gently told John that this wasn't charity. It was trust that he could live well, work honestly, and support himself through his own labor. Her voice was calm, without pressure or insistence. John lowered his head for a long time, his hands clenched tightly. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. He said only one short sentence, but it came straight from the heart. He didn't promise to become rich, but he promised to live decently. From then on, the small truck became John's new companion. He used it to transport chickens, eggs, and fruit to the market. The work was still hard, but everything became more stable. Each trip the truck made was a step away from his old past, and a step closer to the steady life he was striving to build. As the new year 2026 arrived, John set a simple goal for himself: to continue living honestly, making amends, and earning more income with his own hands. No supervision, no reminders, because he understood that once trust had been given, the most important thing was to live in a way that deserved it. As for James and Diep, they didn't wait for gratitude. Just knowing that somewhere, someone was trying to live better each day was enough. Sometimes, happiness doesn't come from how much we have, but from helping someone else stand firmly in this life. Stay tuned for the next episode to continue following James and Diep's journey, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
Xin chào mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình nhé. Mình đang tìm lại mấy cái video để mình lưu lại. Dạ. Cậu ơi đợi vợ một tí vợ đang quên nói. Hả? Vâng, nó bảo. Tạm biệt mọi người. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video tiếp theo.